جزاكم الله خير. I was here. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين وسيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين، أما بعد. So alhamdulillah, we are continuing. We didn't take a break yet, so we'll go steady for the next couple of weeks until I think the end of November, inshallah. We have a speaker. I don't know if you guys heard about this. Islam by Touch. Have you ever heard of that before? Islam by Touch. So it's an organization that is for the blind to create, to print the Quran and whatever education material for blind Muslims to be able to read. But inshallah, we're going to have a workshop on that Friday. I have invited one of the people I know, mashallah, he's also blind. But he's going to give a workshop about dealing with the disabled Muslims, how to deal with them, what do they need, provided for them. So inshallah, we have like a good 3 weeks of the halaqas that we're doing over here, and then a workshop, and then we're going to continue again with the workshops. Hopefully that way you don't get bored of these halaqas that we do every week. It's good to have a break, ya Sheikh. It's good to have a break. طيب. So we are continuing with the story of Musa alayhi salam. And where we left off was, where? Where did we leave off? And there's an agreement that he would work for 80 years, Sheikh. Allahu Akbar. 8 years, type. I heard 80. With the, okay. فأتممت 10 فمن عند نفسك. طيب. So we are at the time period where actually Musa alayhi salam did fulfill his contract with his father-in-law. And in fact, as the hadith mentioned that Musa alayhi salam, he did khayrul ajalain, right, the best of the two periods, which means that he completed the 10 years, because that is the level of the ihsan, right, in terms of working, even though we know that Shu'aib alayhi salam did not ask him to do that, right? So Shu'aib did not request that from him, but it was Musa alayhi salam from his own, from his own self, from his own ihsan, that he went and he did the 10 years. And after he finished the 10 years, he decided he wanted to go back to Egypt. And so he took his wife and his family, and he traveled back to Egypt. Now, once he was on his way, what happened was that Musa alayhi salam lost his way. Right, Musa alayhi salam had lost his way. And from description of the different verses in the Quran, it seemed that when he lost his way, it was at a time where it was at night, and it was also cold. Right, it was at night and it was cold. And as he was walking, of course, if you can imagine, if you are responsible for a family, and you're walking through a desert, and you're lost, and it's cold, you're not exactly going to be very relaxed. You're going to be concerned, worried. And subhanAllah, this is when the story picks up after that, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that Musa alayhi salam قال لأهلهم كثوا إني آنست نارا, right? What happened was that he saw what he thought was fire, right? He thought it was fire. And so he told his family, كثوا, right? Remain here. إني آنست نارا, I have perceived a fire, right? And then what he said, لعلي آتيكم منها بخبر أو جذوة من النار لعلكم تصطلون. So perhaps that I perceived a fire, stay here, I have perceived a fire, perhaps that I would be able to bring you some information. So this tells you that he was lost. He needs to figure out where he is and where he's headed, right? Or burning wood so that you might warm yourselves. So this is where we get the whole idea that, or the perception, that it was dark at night and he lost his way and it was cold. And so Musa alayhi salam, right, when we look at this, right, we understand that Musa alayhi salam, when he saw this light, he didn't know what was it, right? He assumed it was a fire. And so when he came to it, فَلَمَّا أَتَاهَا نُودِيَ مِنْ شَاطِئِ الْوَادِ الأيمن في البقعة المباركة من الشجرة أي يا موسى إني أنا الله رب العالمين. Okay. And so once he got close to it, once he left his family behind and he got close to the area, he heard a call, right? Nudiya Musa. And so it was called to Musa alayhi salam, O Musa, indeed I am. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes, of course, where this was. So he described it as he called from the right side of the valley in a blessed spot, right? From the tree. O Musa, ya Musa, indeed I am Allah, the Lord of the worlds. And so Musa intentionally, he was heading to find some sort of either warmth or guidance. And subhanAllah, he did receive guidance. But it was not the guidance he intended, right? It is a guidance that went further and beyond what he would have ever imagined. Rather than just guiding himself and his family, he found a guidance that would lead him to the best of paths, but also a guide to the rest of the ummah of that time, right, of Bani Israel. And so, subhanAllah, like you never know what Allah plans for you. And from this, it's amazing how subhanahu wa ta'ala chose and selected and put things in place so that he would take Musa and deliver that prophethood, right, in a specific time, in a specific place that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had decreed. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, أَنَا اخْتَرْتُكَ فَاسْتَمِعْ لِمَا يُوحَى. I have chosen you, right? So listen to what is being revealed. Right? Now once again, this is happening in the darkness of the night, right? When Ibrahim alayhi salam received that call. Now we know definitely when Musa alayhi salam received that call, we definitely know Musa alayhi salam worshipped Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because in the end he was from Bani Israel and they worshipped Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, did Musa alayhi salam, so he was not a prophet before this, by the way. So let's clear this out. He was not a prophet before this. It was not until later on. Usually the Prophet ﷺ, and we know that the Prophet ﷺ had mentioned that the time of prophethood, the age of prophethood is 40 years of age, and that's for the majority of scholars, wallahu a'lam. But I want you to imagine the state that Musa alayhi salam might be in. He worships Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then all of a sudden he gets to a place and he hears Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling him, I have chosen you, right, to be a messenger. What would the feeling be at that time? Right? Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's speech is unparalleled. And Musa alayhi salam is listening to the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed him to hear his speech. And naturally speaking, there has to be some sort of effect upon an individual when you hear the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? A time perhaps that that it does affect your level of iman, but also the feeling that possesses an individual when you would hear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And so this perhaps the state of that he was in, especially when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him, I am the Lord of the worlds and I have chosen you. All of a sudden Musa alayhi salam realized that he has been chosen. Okay. طيب. There are three surahs that mention why Musa alayhi salam went to that place when he saw that fire, right? The first intention was what? We mentioned already. Why did he go to that fire? Because he wanted to bring something to warm his family. The second reason? Guidance. طيب. Did he go there knowing I'm going to be a prophet? No, he didn't, right? And this is something that's important because we need to understand that none of the prophets ever knew that they were going to be prophets, okay? Maybe perhaps an exception might that would be Isa ibn Maryam perhaps, or some of the debated ones, but the majority of prophets, in fact, some scholars say all the prophets never knew that they were going to be prophets. And prophethood, they tell you, is not something that you train yourself for or something that you practice. This is something that is a selection from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And this is why the Quran specifically reiterated the intention of Musa alayhi salam of why he was heading towards it, because he had no idea what was going to happen. He had no idea he was going to be a messenger or be chosen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It never kind of crossed his mind ever, right? Yes. Yeah. And there's they say فجاءت الوحي, right? The sudden surprise of the revelation. And that's how they all felt essentially, right? And so it's important for us to know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala selects His messengers. It's not something that you build yourself up to it. You cannot do certain things so that Allah would select you to be a prophet. You know? And this is something that usually, like, in the books of Aqeedah, they discuss this because there's some deviations in like, thinking that perhaps if you do certain things, you can be selected to be a prophet or a revelation. None of that happens. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Inna Allah ya'lamu ayna yada' risalati, right? He knows that where He has placed His risala. Now, the other thing I want to focus on regarding this verse, because it tells you the kind of what was going on is kind of interesting. He said, Inni anastu nara. He used the word anastu. Okay, what does anastu mean in Arabic? Does anybody know over here? There's a sense of tranquility and security. Okay, anastu over here means also I saw, but that vision comes with a sense of peace. And so whatever Musa alayhi salam saw, remember he's in a strange place, he's lost. How does he know that place is secure? He wouldn't, right? But yet, subhanAllah, for some odd reason, this is what he told his family members. He said, I saw it. And he said, Inni anastu nara. Like when he saw that, it caused him a sense of tranquility, a sense of peace, that it drew him to that area. So he didn't feel that there was going to be some sort of harm. He didn't feel that there was going to be some sort of something that was going to affect him in a negative way, or it's going to affect his family, right? There is no fear associated with it, right? Now, once again, bear in mind, it was cold, it was at night, it was a place where he didn't know where it was, and so forth. Yet, subhanAllah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had placed it in a way that it resulted in some sort of peace and tranquility to Musa alayhi salam. Now, the interesting thing is that if you notice, there's nothing in the Quran mentioned regarding his family saying that there's a fire or that we saw a fire. The one who saw it was who? Musa alayhi salam, right? And so some of the scholars, they comment on this, like Ibn Kathir rahimahullah, he said that the fire that Musa has seen, nobody else saw it. Nobody else saw it. Because it was visible to everybody else what's going to happen. Other people are going to go there, right? But it was something that was unique to Musa alayhi salam. Only Musa had seen it. And in fact, they say that it wasn't actually real fire. He thought it was fire, but it was light. Right? It was light in reality. And this is why he saw it, why Musa alayhi salam saw it, and his family did not see it, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to specifically choose him and lead him to that area. And then once he received that, he said, Inni ana Allahu Rabbul Alameen. I am Allah, right? The Lord of the worlds. Then what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if we switch to Surah Taha, so this was Surah Al-Qasas, Taha, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked him an interesting question. He told him, وَمَا تِلْكَ بِيَمِينِكَ يَا Musa. What is that in your right hand, Ya Musa? Now does Allah not know what's in his right hand? In the right hand of Musa? Of course he knows. But why is he asking the question? To make him feel comfortable? طيب. Okay, what we know of Allah, like most people who know the story, right? They know that essentially Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him, وَمَتِكَ بِيَمِينِكَ يَا Musa. And so then Musa, instead of saying it's a staff, yes, but I'm pointing to something, so I'm going to ask why he asked him what's in your hand, and why the interesting long explanation by Musa. Because Musa could have said it's a staff, but yet what did he say? عصاي أتوكأ عليها وأشُّهُ بعلى غمي وليها فيها مآرب أخرى. Okay? So many of the scholars said he just wanted to converse with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When he experienced that sweetness, right? You don't want, Musa knows that Allah, right, knows that it's a staff, and he could have just said, it's a staff, right? But he said, no, it is a staff that I lean on. وَأَهُشُّ بِهَا عَلَى غَنَمِي is interpreted in different ways. One is to guide my sheep, my flock, or it also means to kind of bring down leaves to shade my flock. And I have other reasons to utilize it, right? Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we ask why He asked him to do that, and then he meant, the verses go on, he says, like, فَأَلْقِيهَا يَا مُوسَى, right? فَإِذَا هِيَ حَيَّةٌ تَسْعَى قَالَ خُذْهَا وَلَا تَخَفْ سَنُعِيدُهَا سِيرَتَهَا الْأُولَى. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He told him throw it, right, throw the staff. And so when he threw it, it turned into a snake that moves swiftly. And it was mentioned that it actually turned towards Musa, and it opens his mouth. And Musa alayhi salam was struck with fear, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him, take it and have no fear. So some of the scholars were commenting on this. Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do this with Musa alayhi salam? Right? Why did He ask him to only throw the staff? And then there was another something that happened later on regarding the hand of Musa alayhi salam. But their mentioning is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to further increase the, perhaps, and this is kind of like, a bit of interpretation from my side also, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to assure and increase the level of Iman, right? Because Iman has multiple levels. To increase the Iman of Musa alayhi salam further, that this is truly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it is nothing else. Because one can ask, well, that who was speaking to Musa alayhi salam could have been a jinn. Right? It could have been a jinn. So how do we differentiate between this and that? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provided a proof and evidence that He is Allah by giving Musa alayhi salam a miracle. And the miracle that was given to Musa alayhi salam in this aspect, it's not a sleight of a hand or a visual trickery. It is actually an actual, the staff changed its form. Like it's changed its entity from a inanimate object to a completely full-fledged, moving reptile. Right? And no magician can do that. This is why later on, when we inshallah continue the story, when Musa alayhi salam threw the staff and it turned into a large snake, the magicians knew that this was not magic, because they understand magic. And so Musa alayhi salam, when he did that, he told him, take it as a proof. And then he told him, don't fear, right? And so this was the first evidence. And subhanAllah, that staff later on will come multiple times as a proof of a miracle to Fir'aun, but also it was the staff itself that resulted in the destruction of Fir'aun, because it was the staff that split the sea and the staff that closed the sea by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, yes, He was preparing him, but we have to understand that he did not know that this was the order of Allah at that time. Because when it happened, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders him to throw the snake, to throw the staff. إنما صنعوا كيد ساحر ولا يفلح الساحر حيث أتى. طيب, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives him a second evidence. He says, وَضْمُمْ يَدَكَ إِلَى جَنَاحِكَ تَخْرُجْ بَيْضَاءَ مِنْ غَيْرِ سُوءٍ آيَةً أُخْرى. Where is it? I don't know exactly where it is, right? But we know that it is somewhere in the. Type. I did remember. I just don't want to. I'm confusing with some other place, so I don't want to state right now. But it is on the way from. So Shu'aib was in the eastern part. Madian is in the eastern part of Egypt. So on that way coming back, so it's in the area, in the middle in the area somewhere. I was heading back to I guess Egypt at that time. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it blessed. So He made the area blessed, essentially. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered Musa alayhi salam to take his hand and put it to his side and take it back out, and it will be white without any sort of harm. But the whiteness was kind of unique. Now, to put this in perspective, Musa alayhi salam, what was his skin tone? Skin tone of Musa alayhi salam. Dark, right? It was dark. And when it came out white, so He told him, min ghayri su, without any sort of harm. Why? It's not a what? An illness such as Yes, bars, I know in Arabic, but what's it called in English? Leprosy, thank you. It's called leprosy, right? And so this was a completely different thing. It's like, the hands of Musa alayhi salam, when he took it out, it came out white without any sort of disease. It was something unique. It was like shining, and it was bright. And then when he put it back again, it went away, and the disease doesn't go away that quick. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right, when he told him, so that you understand it is not some sort of leprosy. And so those were two signs that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave to Musa, right, as one, so that it would increase the iman of Musa alayhi salam. And that increase of iman, by the way, because I spoke about the 3 levels of iman, right? And we're talking about certainty over here, right? There's 3 levels of certainty. There is ilm al-yaqeen, and then there's ayn al-yaqeen, and then there is haqq al-yaqeen, right? Yaqeen, which means certainty. So ilm al-yaqeen, which is the certainty of knowledge. So when you acquire knowledge, you acquire certain level of certainty. And then there is ayn al-yaqeen, is when you visualize, when you actually see it. So these are your senses now. It moves from the theoretical certainty to something that you sense. That's something completely different. And then haqq al-yaqeen is that when you completely experience it, right? And so the example of that is, if you want to use worldly things, right? If I describe to you some sort of a chocolate with the wrapper, right? And considering that, hopefully, inshallah, you guys think I'm trustworthy and you believe me, I tell you something that I have in my hand and I describe it, there's a level of certainty that I'm telling you something that is true, it is there, you have a picture in your mind of what it looks like. And then, so that is ilm al-yaqeen, and then I show you what it is, right? That becomes ayn al-yaqeen. And then I gave you, you taste it. That is haqq al-yaqeen. Now, even though I described its sweetness, even though I talked about these things, but that's completely different levels. Similarly, when we talk about Jannah, right? Jannah, there's ilm al-yaqeen. Ayn al-yaqeen, we haven't seen it yet, right? But ayn al-yaqeen is perhaps when we first see it, when the gates open, and then haqq al-yaqeen is when we enter and experience it, right? And so those are the different levels we talk about. Yes, and that's how we understand also. No, I didn't recite it from Surah Al-Baqarah, right? وإذ قال إبراهيم رب أرني كيف تحيي الموتى قال أولم تؤمن قال بلى ولكن ليطمئن قلبي. So Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he said, show me how you resurrect the dead. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, don't you believe? He said, no, I do. But he was seeking a higher level of certainty, right? And this is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him, خُذْ أَرْبَعَةً مِنَ الطَّيْرِ, take 4 birds, فَصُرْهُنَّ إِلَيْكَ, cut them into pieces, and place each part at so different birds with different parts and different mountains, and then call them, they will come to you. That's how we resurrect things, right? And so this is just to indicate that, subhanAllah, Iman does have certain levels, and certainty has certain levels. We try to have as much as we can, but essentially Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provided Musa alayhi salam with these, for one, so that he would know truly this from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to have a level of certainty. But the second, also to realize that he has some sort of evidence when he talks to Fir'aun, that I have these evidences. Because when you make a huge claim, such as that I'm a prophet from Allah, you need to bring supportive evidence, right? There is no prophet that ever came without evidence. We should, like a claim like this, it's a huge claim, we should always provide evidence. This is one of the beautiful things about Islam. Islam is based on, Iman is based on a whole aspect of knowledge, right? There's a lot of part of knowledge, like evidences for the authenticity and the correctness of, for example, the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the correctness of this religion, the proofs of prophethood. All those exist in Islam, right? In a way that, subhanAllah, that remain compared to other faiths, because they were never meant to stay there, right? Of course, at their time, the prophets, when they came with their evidences, and it's multiple evidences. One of the scholars he mentioned, he says, the greater the claim or the importance, the more diverse the evidences, right? طيب. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he had given Musa alayhi salam these miracles, and then he instructed him what to do. He said, اذهب إلى فرعون إنه طغى. Okay. So he said, go to Fir'aun, for he has طغى. طغى, which means an individual who went beyond bounds. right? And it comes, طغى, which means like he went overboard. And it comes from a طغيان, which means oppression, but in this case, it's like a huge amount of oppression. And by far, Fir'aun, he really did go way and above and beyond what is supposed to be there. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one of the reasons He sends messengers is that to correct and rectify huge errors or oppressions that might happen in a society. Right? In this case, that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent Musa at the time where Fir'aun is. But we're going to look at the verses, and we're going to switch to Surah Taha from Al-Qasas, because Musa alayhi salam made several du'as that are very interesting. And those du'as, wallahu a'lam, the intention of it is that Musa felt that these are the things that he needed to be able to fulfill the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To be able to fulfill what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala entrusted him to do and deliver. So I'm going to stop first. إنه طغى, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling Musa alayhi salam that Fir'aun went way overboard. So go to him. Okay? And so this tells us that the prophets were sent time and over time to go against the wrongs of society or to correct the wrongs of society. And when oppression is so immense that it requires Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to send a messenger, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does send a messenger. Right? And once again, when we talk about tughyan, it is not just regular oppression, it's an immense form of oppression that goes way beyond every sort of boundary that we can think of. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, once He mentioned that, immediately Musa alayhi salam, he made several requests. Right? The first thing he said, رَبِّ اشْرَحْ لِي صَدْرِي وَيَسِّرْ لِي أَمْرِي وَاحْلُلْ عُقْدَةً مِّن لِسَانِي يَفْقَهُ قَوْلِي وَاجْعَلْ لِي وَزِيرًا مِّنْ أَهْلِي هَارُونَ أَخِي أُشْدُدْ بِهِ أَزْرِي. Right? وأشركه في أمري كي نسبحك كثيرا ونذكرك كثيرا إنك كنت بنا بصيرا قال قد أوتيت سؤلك يا موسى. And so over here, if we look at those, the quick meaning of these verses is that Musa alayhi salam, once Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered him to go to Fir'aun, and Musa knows Fir'aun. He knows how he is. And by the way, just to comment on just an understanding of Fir'aun's state or how he was. As a Fir'aun, when he told people, أَنَّ رَبُّكُمُ الْأَعْلَى, right? أَنَّ رَبُّكُمْ, I am your Lord. He didn't say, I'm the creator. Right? He didn't say, I'm the creator, because they know he's not the creator. He said, I am your Lord. And in fact, we know that he himself, Fir'aun, worshipped something. But essentially what he's indicating is that he's giving himself a quality of the Lord, meaning that my statements, my ruling is the only and absolute, non-questionable. I don't take anybody's opinions. You don't talk back to me. You don't. So essentially, he put himself like he's dealing with himself like how we deal with, like how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is supposed to be. We don't question Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah does not consult anybody, and all these things. And so Musa alayhi salam knows that when he goes to Fir'aun, he's talking to a person that doesn't listen to anybody. And the minute he's upset, what does he do? What does Fir'aun do when he's upset? He smiles, right? Does he yell? What does he do? He kills, right? That's it. It's done, right? The minute you anger him in any way, that's a one death row sentence. It's a one way to whatever, to the hereafter. Musa knows this. And so he made that dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the first thing he said, رَبِّ اشْرَحْ لِي صَيَادِي. Oh Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, expand, right? So he said expand or relax, expand my breasts with assurance. And sometimes it's referring to the heart. Sadr over here can be referred to the heart. So that's the first thing. اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري, which means and ease for me my task. واحلل عقدة من لساني, and untie a knot from my tongue. Why? يفقهوا قولي, so that they may understand my speech. And we're going to comment on that later on. واجعل لي وزيرا من أهلي, and appoint for me a minister, like an assistant. Any assistant? No, from my family. Anybody from his family? No. هارون أخي, right? My brother Harun, which is Aaron, I guess, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right? Aaron? طيب. Ujdud bihi azri, right? Which means that you increase through him my strength. Ujdud bihi azri. Wa ashrikhu fi amri, which means and let him share my task, referring to prophethood, right? Share my task to become a prophet. Why? So that we would exalt you much, so that we would also remember you much, right? Indeed, O Allah, you are over us ever seeing. Meaning, O Allah, you know why we're asking what we're doing. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the end of that, He said, قَدْ أُوتِيتَ سُؤْلَكَ يَا Musa. Musa, we have granted you your request. So let's look at those requests. Let's analyze them, inshallah. Okay. So the first request was what? رَبِّ اشْرَحْ لِي صَدْرِي. Why would he ask for that? Why would he ask for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to expand his heart or relax his heart or chest? Sorry? He was afraid. But what does that have to do with expanding his chest? When you have anxiety, right, your chest tightens. That is very close. That is true. That is very close, right? But it's going to have to be the second one. But any task you perform, if you don't feel like doing it, would you perform it? Would you perform it? No, but you could also try to perform. But if you do perform it in that state, would you perform it the best way possible? No, right? So this is a huge task. A lot of times, so you have to remember, this is now the Musa alayhi salam was tasked with the taklif, with the burden, with the amana of prophethood, of delivering a message. It's not an amana that is very easy. And so the Prophet Musa alayhi salam wants to deliver this in the best way possible. And he understands that having, facing something with the desire not to do it does affect an individual. So he asks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to expand his heart for that mission, right? Ishrah li sadri. That is the first thing, right? The second is essentially Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was sending Musa alayhi salam to advise Fir'aun, right? And that's not something that anybody would want to do. And so that goes a bit of a level of fear and anxiety, I guess, right? And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right, felt like, perhaps Musa felt like a heavy weight on him, so he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to expand his heart and his chest for it, okay? So that's why he said, رَبِّ اشْرَحْ لِي صَدْرِي. And so essentially Musa is perhaps asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if I face this, this طاغية, this oppressor, this person who transgresses upon the rights of human beings and he kills them, then I would find this tightness in my chest, okay? Now what happens when people's chests get tightened? Huh? You can't just breathe. Can you function? Can you clearly speak what you want? No, right? And so رَبِّ اشْرَحْ لِي صَدْرِي, right? And this has later on with why he said وَحْلُلْ عُقْدَةً مِّن لِسَانِي, right? Because if you have that feeling, your tongue tends to knot. We're going to talk about that a bit more. And so he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to not allow that to happen, to release it, so that he'll be able to speak to Fir'aun in the best way possible, to deliver that message in a clear way. Yes. 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 Yeah, obviously he was, but you have to realize that a decade passed. So 10 years, things change, whatever happens. And so, most people, they change the way their looks change, the community changes. People forget after 10 years that there was a murder, something happened. So obviously there is a level of worry, wallahu alam, but it's not obviously as concerned as when the immediate events happen, when people aren't following you. After 10 years, they're going to give up on following you, not even going to look for you. Right? Wallahu alam. طيب. By the way, one of the signs that a person's kind of chest is being kind of constricted is that the way they speak is affected, right? I'm not talking about that they would stutter or anything like that, but they're not as fluent in how they want to deliver their thoughts and ideas. Right. Then Musa alayhi salam, right? He asked him. He said, وَيَسِّرْ لِي أَمْرِي, right? يَسِّرْ لِي أَمْرِي, which means make my affairs easy. Now, why did he ask for that? Is this internal or external stuff? So, اشرح لي صدري is internal. وَيَسِّرْ لِي أَمْرِي is external. Good. So, to be able to succeed in a task, you need both. Right? You need to be prepared, right? Whether internally you're good, mentally you're prepared to carry on that task. But a person who is willing to do that, and by the way, it's important to have that internal situation, because without that, we tend to think tasks are too big for us to accomplish. But in reality, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave the human being such immense capabilities that they're able to overcome the largest and most complicated of tasks. But part of not being able to finish or accomplish them is usually more of an internal reflection, an internal aspect. It's their view of it, right? They see a mountain and they're like, oh my God, how am I going to do this, right? But a person can look at it and start saying, mountain, yeah, inshallah I can move this. Inshallah I can deal with this, right? It's more of how you're doing from inside. That has to do with the expansion of the chest. But that being said, even if a person has that, if things are not facilitated for them, they might not accomplish the task. But when he asks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to facilitate this for him, this is more of a guarantee. This is the reflection of Musa alayhi salam, perhaps, right? This is what he needs to finish. And so he asks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to facilitate, which means give him the external things that are necessary to complete his task. And so the same thing for us, inshallah, when we want to face some sort of a task, it's a beautiful dua. At least these two things we'd remember, right? We'd say, Rabbi ishrah li sadri wa yassir li amri. Whether it is we're going to have to go talk to our bosses at work, right? Or whether it's a project we have to do or some sort of conflict we have to deal with. You name it. Children, spouses, families, bosses, whatever the case is, right? A huge task that we have to do. It's a beautiful dua that we hold on to. Is Rabbi ishrah li sadri wa yassir li amri. Right? Because as long as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala facilitates for us, what we need to do, it'll be easier for us to accomplish those tasks. Type. Now, then Musa alayhi salam, right, he continues that. He said, وَحْلُلْ عُقْدَةً مِنْ لِسَانِي. Type. In another verse in the Quran, the Prophet Musa alayhi salam said, وَيَضِيقُ صَدْرِي وَلَا يَنْطَلِقُ لِسَانِي. That my chest would يضيق, which means restrict. And so my tongue would not be ينطلق, it would not be fluent, it would not be released. And so why am I mentioning this? Is because there's a debate among the scholars. What does he mean? وَحْلُلْ عُقْدَةً مِنْ لِسَانِي يَفْقَهُ قَوْلِي, right? Untie a knot from my tongue so that they would comprehend and understand my statements. And so some of the scholars, they say that Musa alayhi salam did not have a speech impediment. But rather he's talking about this aspect that if he has that restriction in his chest, he would not be able to fluently communicate clearly the da'wah that he needs to communicate. And this comes from that verse that my chest would constrict and my tongue does not be released or fluent. So this is that opinion, and I'm mentioning this because there are several other opinions in the books of tafsir you're going to see. I'm going to mention them right now. One interpretation is something that Abdullah ibn Abbas had mentioned. Right? He mentioned Abdullah ibn Abbas. He said that the knot in the tongue of Musa alayhi salam was caused by a burning of a coal. That a coal burned his tongue. And the story behind it is that when he was a child and he was in the lap of Fir'aun, what he did was he pulled the beard of Fir'aun. And of course, Fir'aun was so happy and jolly about it. He's like, ha ha, he pulled my beard, right? No, of course not. He hated Musa. He didn't like Musa, right? And so he got really angry, and then he remembered the vision that he was told that a person from Bani Israel is going to do this. And so what Musa did, so what Fir'aun did, he called the executioner to execute Musa. Who intervened? Asiya, right? Asiya, the wife of Fir'aun. And she said, he's a child. Like he didn't mean it. And so Fir'aun is like, no, he knows what he's doing. And Asiya is like, no, he's a child, right? And so the conversation went back and forth. And so what she did was she said, okay, fine, I'm going to give him a coal and a date, right? A child would not differentiate between either of them, which is true. Children without experience cannot differentiate, right? I just saw an interesting documentary that children by nature, they have no fear, right? And they learn fear from their parents. And to show this, they put kids among snakes. And they did the funniest things. They would just grab the snake and lick the snake and do these things with the snake, right? And so they can't differentiate, right? And of course, you can see the parents from behind the cameras, behind those kids. They're having an anxiety attack, right? But the point is children cannot distinguish between what's beneficial or harmful at a young age. That happens later on, right? They learn that from the reaction of the people around them, but they're also personal experiences. So if they put their hand in a fire and they get burnt, they have that experience. Or if they want to come next to it and they see their parents freaking out, they'll understand this is something that is bad, right? So over here, she put a date and a coal in front of Musa alayhi salam. And so obviously the whole idea is if he didn't know what's happening, he's gonna could pick the coal, right? It was mentioned that Abdullah ibn Abbas, he said that it was Jibreel alayhi salam that pushed Musa's hand towards the coal. But if he touches the coal, wouldn't it burn him? So Abdullah ibn Abbas mentioned that it was actually Jibreel alayhi salam that helped Musa lift it, right? So it was actually the lifting of Jibreel, and then he placed it in his tongue and it burnt him. And that caused the speech impediment in Musa alayhi salam. So many scholars, although they mentioned this, they said that it is, they have issues with the chain of narration associated with it. The other reason, the other interpretation of the uqda, they said that why Musa alayhi salam might have a speech, like his tongue might not be released, not a speech impediment, but not be released. They said that Musa alayhi salam, when he conversed with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah conversed with him, that Musa's tongue would not be released when he would talk to normal people, the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? That is one interpretation. The other one had to do with referring to the haya of Musa alayhi salam, that how would he talk to other people after talking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And so this was like something that Musa couldn't do out of his haya, and so he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would release his tongue. So of course, those are three interpretations in the Quran. The one that is most likely from those three is the one with the story of Abdullah ibn Abbas, because he would not relate anything like that without proof from the Prophet ﷺ. But because there's an issue in that hadith, perhaps some of the scholars, they lean more towards combining the verses of the Quran and interpreting being that Musa alayhi salam, if he was going to be out of fear or restricted, his tongue would not be as fluent as it normally would be. Okay, wallahu alam. طيب. And so this has to wahlul uqda min lisani, but then he explained why he want his tongue to be released. يفقه قولي, right? So that they would understand my speech. Now, this tells us why it's important for us to really, as much as we can, focus on how we deliver things, how we speak. That is something that's important. It's a means of communication. And the best of ways to deliver some sort of a da'wah is that our speech would be clear. Right? And subhanAllah, the Prophet ﷺ was blessed with this. Our Prophet ﷺ was blessed with this, that he would be able to speak clearly in concise ways that is understandable, right? To deliver that da'wah. He never had problems with that. And Musa alayhi salam didn't just want people to hear him, he wanted people to understand him. Okay? This is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tends to send every messenger from that nation to speak the same language. Because there's no point of going to people and you speak different languages and give them that message, right? I'm talking about those messengers. Some of the people ask, like, why is Islam in the Arabic language? Right? They would say, why is Islam like in the Arabic language? Well, it's very simple. Allah has to send a messenger and He has to send it with a language. So it's the same argument. Well, why not in I don't know, Latin? Right? Why not in Latin? Why not in other languages? Well, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent the Prophet ﷺ to that, to those people with that language. So you had to choose a language. But also I'm going to add to that, the Arabic language is one of the most eloquent and strongest languages to ever exist. Right? And so the expressions of it was meant to be, we're talking about the Prophet ﷺ was sent to a group of people who they prided themselves at their eloquency of language. And so here came the Quran, right, to challenge them in that eloquence, right? Because obviously the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and nothing's above it. Go ahead, Isha. Yes, we don't send it except with the tongue of their people. So does that mean that, for Muslims to become Muslims, they need to speak the Arabic language? Of course not. It doesn't mean that, right? But that being said, no one can deny that the comprehension of the Quran will be extensively increased with knowing the Arabic language. Yes. Your friend. طيب. And so you're her lawyer. Go. It's okay. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm just joking. Sorry. Go ahead. No. The reason I'm asking that is because usually a person relaying the question will never relay it the same way as the person themselves. So it'll be lost in translation, right? No. No. So we're talking about, sorry, I shifted gears without being clear. So I switched from talking about Musa to talking about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? I kind of switched there, and I apologize. I made that switch without making it clear. No, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke to Musa alayhi salam in obviously the way that Musa would understand. Right? So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed Musa to hear him, it happened in a way that Musa would comprehend it. So it was not in the Arabic language. Allah Alam. I wasn't there. I don't know, Shaykh, what language it was. It was definitely not the modern Hebrew. Definitely not the modern Hebrew, right? The language is extinct. It doesn't exist anymore. Was it Aramaic? Maybe, Allah Alam, I don't know. But I never really, it never piqued my interest, so I never searched for it. It's one of those things that I think is useless information. I'm sorry, but my perspective. It's my perspective. Others might find it very important, people who are interested in languages and stuff like that. It doesn't mean that this is a very bad question. I'm just saying, at all. Just I personally, as a human being, it never popped in my mind because I didn't care about it. My brain is more analytical, I guess. Right? What is the benefit of the message? Like Noga said, it's a great question. I will look into it, inshallah, and I'll try to answer it, inshallah. But I don't know, and I didn't mean to answer it in a way that at all. Wallah nazim. Who was it? Somebody was. I'm sorry. It has nothing to do with your question, but sometimes things pop in our minds because of it's a consequent thought. So one person was asking a scholar. He said that when he was talking about jinn, right, get married, right? Jinn are they're creations, and so they have spouses, they have children, and so a person asked the sheikh who was sitting there. He says, "What's the name of the wife of Iblis?" Right, and so he said, "This is a wedding I did not attend," right. We don't know, right? We know, yes, that they have wives, but there's information we don't know, and it doesn't hinder we don't know certain information, right? So, for example, if we never knew what the language was, there's no harm in it, right? If we know, alhamdulillah, it's good, right? And so I will try to look into it, inshallah. No, it's not the modern Hebrew. Modern Hebrew is a new language. It's not the Hebrew language. The Hebrew language or whatever the original Hebrew language is extinct. Wallahu a'lam, as far as I know. طيب. So we're talking about that Musa alayhi salam intended that he wanted people to understand his speech, right? And so this tells us it's important for us to kind of pay attention to how we deliver things, how we speak. And I always have to remind myself not to speak quickly, because I tend to sometimes, when I get excited, I speak very quickly. So please remind me if that's happening. I will slow down as much as I can. But I unfortunately have to focus on doing this. Sometimes that I have to speak a bit clearer, not mumble my words. And I apologize, sometimes my brain thinks a bit faster than I can speak, especially if I'm in my head a bit too much. طيب. Then Musa alayhi salam, what did he ask? He said, وَاجْعَلْ لِي وَزِيرًا مِنْ أَهْلِي. Right, that's the other request he said. He said, and appoint for me a wazir. Wazir is a position, right, a minister, but it means an assistant, right, from my family. And then he specified, Haruna akhi. طيب. So the word wazir, right, what's it called in English? Vazir? I don't know what's it called in English. Wazir, right? No, there's, I'm sorry, I'm going back to when I was a child. I would see these English cartoons, and like, you know, the king would have a vizier or a visor, or I don't know what they would call it. No, not minister. They use that word, but it's more like it's turned into English. The word wazir is used, but it's turned into an English way. You guys never saw those cartoons? Vizier, right? Yeah, the Grand Vizier. Okay, so they use that word vizier because I think it has also sometimes it has other. It's integrated in other languages such as Persian and other things, but it is called a vizier. But the word wazir comes from al-arz, right? Al-arz over here, which means support for lower back or lower back support. Okay, this is why the word wazir literally means a king who has a wazir. Essentially, he has an assistant to support him. Okay, so essentially, Musa alayhi salam, what he felt he needed to be able to do this da'wah is that he would have support, right? Somebody to support him in it. Somebody to carry that message with Musa alayhi salam. طيب. Now, one thing that Musa, when he said, I want a supporter, he also then specified from where. He said, from my family. And then he even specified, not anybody from my family, my brother, Harun. طيب. Just a couple of points on this. One thing we learn from that is that we have to understand, now once again, as Muslims, we reflect and we try to learn from these verses. Right? What we can learn from this is that when we do da'wah, we have to realize that we can never do da'wah depending on ourselves only. We can't do that. We need support. And one way or another, by the way, many of the messengers sought support. And Isa alayhi salam said, Man ansari ila Allah. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told the Prophet sallallahu Hasbuk Allah walladina amanu ma'ak. Right? Sufficient for you is Allah and those who have believed with you. They will be your supporters, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu kunu ansar Allah kama qala Isa ibn Maryam al-Hawariyyin man ansari ila Allah, right? So that whole support is always needed. And so in our realm, when we're doing da'wah, when we're trying to establish, for example, institutions like this, we have to understand it can never be done through one person, right? We need each other to assist one another. Each one of us, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed with some sort of a talent, right? With some sort of something that they excel in. And we're never ever meant to be able, or we're never ever meant to all have the same skills. If you look at it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created with specific tendencies, inclinations, skill sets, that if you look at it, this is a blessing because it complements one another. And so in the path of that da'wah, we need to support one another and utilize one another's talents to be able to deliver this message, right? And this is all for the sake of da'wah. Now, I'm talking about da'wah in the general sense. It doesn't mean a person having to go to call, right? But da'wah comes in different dimensions. Da'wah can never be happening to the Muslims without, for example, institutions. Well, institutions can never be built without buildings. We need engineers. We need, people who put infrastructures, managers able to manage, speakers able to speak, people with knowledge that have knowledge, people with outreach experience to do the outreach experience, people with understanding of publications and writings who do those things. So this is just on top of my head, how many different talents that we need that it's definitely going to have to be required. If Musa alayhi salam asks for support, then we definitely will need support, right? It's never meant for us to do this on our own. And so a person who comes in and feels that they can do everything on their own, they're destined to fail, right? They have to understand this. And so we should learn from this, right? And inshallah, always seek out to build things together, to walk the path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala together, right? It creates a beautiful support network. And we realize that our intention is, to do this. Of course, yes, along that way, we will differ in our opinion. What's the best path? Should we take the left lane, the right lane, right? But there's always ways to settle it, right? And there's multiple ways of doing certain things. No ill intentions, right? No harm from that, differences of opinion and whatever the case is, because it's all on the path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and there's multiple lanes that we can seek. Wallahu a'lam. طيب. The reason I'm saying this, by the way, is because sometimes we have that, the idea is that the correct way to, to reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to do this, right? No. The correct way is to do this. The correct way is to do this. The correct way. Who said they're all not right? They're all right. And they're all there for a reason, is because we have different inclinations, right? What doesn't suit somebody in this area can suit them in the next area. SubhanAllah, it's like the different types of acts of worship. Some people find themselves in prayers. Others find themselves in the Quran. Others find themselves in charity. Others find themselves in fasting. Others find themselves in seeking knowledge, right? Some find themselves in all of them, right? This is our spiritual identity, I guess, put it this way, right? Where we're inclined towards. And this is from the blessing of Allah Ta'ala, blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we need all of those to exist in the ummah. Wallahu a'lam. طيب. Anyway, the whole point is to realize that we need support. Musa alayhi salam asked for support. Now, when he asked specifically for Harun, why did he pick Harun alayhi salam? Who was smart? Well, yes, I understand, but we have to understand because there's a lot of misconceptions associated with this. Did he choose him because he's like, yeah, my clan member, right? My family member. Why did he choose specifically Harun? Not just that, not just rely on and trust him, but Musa alayhi salam perhaps might have felt that he had qualities in him that made him suitable to be in the role of a prophet also. In fact, he also explained, he said, هارون فإنه أفصح مني لسانا فأرسله معي يرد أن يصدقني. Right? And so he said Harun, right, is more fluent than me in tongue, so send him with me as a support, verifying me. Right? And so perhaps he knew that Harun alayhi salam had the qualities and the skill set that makes him qualified to be a prophet. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by the way, He had already decreed that Harun would be a prophet. Right? He already decreed that Harun would be a prophet, but He also decreed that the reason He will make him a prophet is because of the request of dua of Musa alayhi salam, but also ahead of time Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had placed the qualities in Harun that are necessary. So this doesn't happen all of a sudden, right? But Musa alayhi salam realized that there were certain qualities in there that made them suitable. But it also makes us realize that we have to make sure whomever we put in whatever position, they need to have the qualified skill sets that would make them succeed in it. Because otherwise, when we put people without the proper skill sets, they will fail and we will fail. Right? Because the task is not done and it harms us overall. Right? Especially if we're talking about in the realm of da'wah. There's not just the person doing the call and the building, but also there's the people being taught and the infrastructure of the place and all these things. So we have to make sure that we would put the right people in the right spot, right? And make sure that they have the proper skills. Are you translating or? Okay, I'm sorry. طيب. When he said ashirku fi amri, right? Give him a share in what I have. Because also Musa alayhi salam, he felt that I am going to face Fir'aun. It has to be support two people at least with evidences and support facing Fir'aun. And so, وَاجْعَلْ لِي وَزِيرًا مِنْ أَهْلِي هَارُونَ أَخِي وَاشْدُدْ بِهِ أَزْرِي وَأَشْرِكْهُ فِي أَمْرِي. And then he said, كَيْ نُسَبِّحَكَ كَثِيرًا. Right? Now, one comment, by the way, about this. It was mentioned that there is no brother in the world that bestowed a favor that's unparalleled upon his brother than Musa alayhi salam. Right? You know when the Prophet ﷺ said, خَيْرُكُمْ خَيْرُكُمْ لِأَهْلِ, the best of you is best for his family. There's nobody that has ever did a favor that is so great to his brother, such as Musa alayhi salam to his brother. Prophet Hud, what did he do? Yeah. طيب. And then Musa alayhi salam ended that request by saying, إِنَّكَ كُنْتَ بِنَا بَصِيرًا. Right? That indeed you are over us ever seeing. Why did Musa end with this? So after making all that request, he said, إِنَّكَ كُنْتَ بِنَا بَصِيرًا. That is true, but also when I'm making requests, right, huge favors, and then Musa alayhi salam, I didn't put this in there, but it was there. He said, كَيْ نُسَبِّحْكَ كَثِيرًا وَنَذْكُرَكَ كَثِيرًا إِنَّكَ كُنْتَ بِنَا بَصِيرًا. So that we would exalt you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Meaning that in our da'wah, it will result that we are exalting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We are, destroying the idols that are being worshipped. We are removing that oppression from this world that others are worshipped other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is exalting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. نُسَبِّحْكَ كَثِيرًا وَنَشْكُرَكَ كَثِيرًا. Right? To express our gratitude and to remember you quite often. So all this request, that is the end result, and you, Allah, is over us seeing. You know if we're truthful or not in our intentions. Right? You know what we need. Right? And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Musa alayhi salam was mentioning that there is nothing that we can hide. Right? And so even if we try to do something that is, in our way to deceive Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it can never happen. And so Musa alayhi salam was expressing his sincerity in that dua. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the end, he told him, قَدْ أُوتِيتَ سُؤْلَكَ يَا Musa. O Musa, you have been given your request. Everything you need to fulfill your mission, I'm going to give you. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, next verses, he shows Musa alayhi salam how many blessings he had already bestowed on him, in addition to fulfilling those that he wanted on multiple risks. And this comes right before, after Musa asks for those things, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instructs Musa about how to deliver the da'wah. We're going to take that next week, inshallah. All right, I don't want to prolong this. It's already 9:25. We'll stop here if you guys have any questions. No? Jazakumullah khair. Tea at the back. All right, go ahead, Sheikh. Wait, somebody has a question. You have a question? She raised her hand. No question? I was so excited. طيب. Yes, go ahead, Sheikh. A comment and a question. طيب, go ahead, Sheikh. What? Okay, when he pulled it. Yes. Yes. From the beginning, Sheikh. From the beginning, when he wanted to first kill him, she said, قُرَّةٌ عَيْنٍ لِي وَلَكَ, a soothing eye for me, and وَعَسَىٰ أَنْ يَنْفَعَنَا أَوْ نَتَّخِذَهُ وَلَدًا, perhaps we're going to benefit from him, or for all husbands. Is that your comment, ya Sheikh? طيب. What's your question, ya Sheikh? Here's a question. Do you know why Asiya had an effect on Fir'aun? Do you know why Asiya had effect on Fir'aun? No. Well, she's not a believer yet. Why did she ever have an effect on Fir'aun? Well, one, Fir'aun was not treating her like a pharaoh. It was more of a husband and wife relationship. But Asiya knew the keys, right, to get to her husband. Essentially, that's how she was able to get to him. If she didn't have those keys, she would not be able to get to her husband. And so she touched on things, right, that Fir'aun, right, might need. So for example, when she told him, قُرَّةَ عَيْنٌ لِي وَلَكَ عَسَى يَنْفَعْنَا وَنَتَّخِذُ وَلَدًا, a soothing eye for me and you, or, like, he benefit us or we take him as a child. She was hinting to the fact that she was barren, that Fir'aun couldn't have kids. And so she came to him from that side, right, the emotional aspect. Essentially, Allah Alam, she understood her husband very well. This is why when you know an individual, doesn't matter if it's a wife or a husband, but any human being who knows another human being very well, they know how to get to them. They know how to convince them because they know how to access the things that would make them accept things. Similar to how they know exactly how to push their buttons, right? I'm gonna guess you guys push somebody's buttons. طيب. Wallahu a'lam. Yes. By the way, I was thinking of my kids when I was saying this statement. Because they know how to push each other's buttons so well, right? SubhanAllah. I wasn't thinking of husband and wife, just to kind of clear my grounds over here, right? Yes. No, there is no mention of that. Wallahu a'lam. But there's stipulations like, understanding that he took them with him, they stayed with him, and they crossed the ocean and the sea with him. That's the, the idea. Because we know Musa alayhi salam did have offsprings, right, later on. Wallahu a'lam. طيب, any more questions? Yes.
Musa was in Madian. He just got married one of Shu'aib's daughters.
Yes.
Do we know why he wanted to take his family and go back to Egypt? Do we know why?
No, it's 10 years later, Sheikh. This was 10 years. It's not just, it's 10 years later. And so you have to understand that as a human being, you probably would want to go see your family. His family in Egypt. His mom, his brother, all these things. And so it's not strange for a person, if they got married, they belong to their family, and so they would go back to see them. That's a possibility, right? There's no a clear indication why, but you can think humanly, just basically humanly, why would a person want to go back home? Well, because his family's there, right? He want to go visit his family. So one of the sisters asked about the threat. Is the threat still there? So imagine 10 years later have passed. And so nobody's hot on his trail anymore. He's probably forgotten. And so it's a lot safer to go back home, especially that people haven't seen him in 10 years. Many people have forgotten. A new generation has come. Wallahu a'lam. Yes, Sheikh. I did. طيب. So why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, why did Musa alayhi, you are إِنَّكَ كُنْتَ بِنَا بَصِيرًا. You are over us, ever seeing, because essentially it's showing the sincerity of the dua of Musa alayhi salam, that whatever I'm asking you truly is so that we would glorify you and remember you. Right? Does it make sense? طيب. If my child asks me, he says, Dad, I want this, this, and this because I want to do this. And Baba, you know me more than anybody else. You know this is the true and the reality, and this is why I want these things. Does it make sense now? Wallahu a'lam.
And this is not specific to Musa alayhi salam. Even Ibrahim, رَبَّنَا إِنَّكَ تَعْلَمُ مَا نُخْفِي وَمَا نُعْلِنُ.
This is a dua that you invoke because it expresses sincerity. Right? Allah, you know my situation better than anybody else. Right? It invokes sincerity, but it also draws to, you're asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He knows what is beneficial, so please give me what I need. Wallahu a'lam. Yes. No, he was on his way to Egypt. I don't know if he crossed the boundaries of Egypt yet or whatever the case is, but he was on his way back home, but he got lost. Harun was in Egypt. Yeah, Harun was in Egypt. Wallahu a'lam. Any more questions? طيب جزاكم الله خير سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك اللهم نسألك الهدى والتقى والعفاف والغنى. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us to the straight path. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to provide us with knowledge that would benefit us. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bestow His blessing upon this gathering and forgive everybody in this gathering. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to reconcile among our hearts. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to walk in the footsteps of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to remove all the hardships that we face. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to increase our iman and to bring us together in this place as brothers and sisters. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to alleviate the pain and hardship that our brothers and sisters are feeling all over the world, the oppression that they are facing. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow them to overcome those who desire to harm them. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. جزاكم الله خير. There is chai at the back. Please help yourself. Use this time to socialize, inshallah. I think we need to close the doors by midnight. So no, before that, right? I'm joking, by the way, guys. Don't hold me to this. The president is here. Please leave before midnight. We'll continue next Friday, inshallah.